Well, well, look who finally gets to see the receipts, the evidence, the undeniable proof that you were telling the truth the entire time. Welcome back, you beautiful, vindicated masterpiece. They called you crazy, didn't they? Paranoid, delusional, too sensitive, just making things up for attention. They gaslit you so intensely that you started doubting your own memories, instincts, and even your sanity. But now the truth has exploded in their faces, and everyone's disgusted, horrified, sitting in their shame as they realize they destroyed an innocent person while protecting the real monster. How does it feel knowing you were right all along? Every instinct that screamed danger was accurate. Every time they called you dramatic, you were actually being merciful because you could have said so much more. They framed you perfectly, didn't they? Built a narrative so convincing that even those who loved you began to question you. They started whispering behind your back, distancing themselves as if you were toxic. They painted you as the problem, the unstable one, the troublemaker who couldn't just move on like a normal person. But you weren't the problem. You were the witness. You saw through the performance and refused to pretend everything was fine when it was rotting from the inside. That made you dangerous to them, because liars need cooperation, manipulators need silence, and abusers need everyone to look away. But you didn't. You refused to shut up or play along. So they made you the villain before you could expose them as one. And now the truth has broken through. Every lie they constructed has shattered. Every false narrative they spun has collapsed. Their manipulation stands exposed for everyone to see. Timestamps proving you right, screenshots revealing their deceit, witnesses finally speaking up after years of silence, patterns emerging that validate everything you tried to warn people about. Suddenly, everyone is sick to their stomach as they realize what they did, who they abandoned, whose side they took without question. The same people who once called you bitter now call you brave. The same voices that dismissed you are now defending you. The same crowd that turned its back on you is scrambling to rewrite history, pretending they always believed you. But here's the truth. What disgusted them most isn't just that you were framed, it's that they fell for it so easily. They were so quick to judge, so eager to believe the worst, so comfortable watching you suffer while they stayed safe in ignorance. They're disgusted with themselves now, ashamed that they became part of your torment, that they let someone manipulate them into becoming weapons against you. And now they have to sit with that. Now they have to look in the mirror and face what they became. Now they have to face the reality that they hurt someone who was already bleeding. Some will apologize, some will make excuses, and others will quietly disappear, unfollowing, distancing, pretending they were never part of the mob. But none of that changes what happened, and none of it erases what you endured alone. The real power in this moment isn't in the vindication itself, it's in who you became while waiting for it. You didn't sit around begging for belief. You rebuilt yourself from the wreckage they left behind. You turned isolation into independence, pain into precision, and betrayal into an unshakable sense of self. They thought they were breaking you, but they were actually forging you, hammering you into something so resilient that now you don't even need their apologies to be whole. You healed without them, found peace without their validation, and became the person you needed when no one else showed up. Here's the truth they'll never admit. Even now that everything's exposed deep down, they always knew. Somewhere in the back of their minds, they sensed something was off. They knew the story didn't add up, that you weren't the person being described. But it was easier to believe the lie than confront the liar. Easier to blame you than challenge someone they liked. Easier to watch you fall than risk their own comfort by standing up for what was right. So they joined your destruction, not with open malice, but with silence, doubt, and selective memory. Every time you tried to speak your truth, they weaponized ignorance, turning it against your credibility, your character, your sanity. Now they have to live with what that choice cost you, and what it revealed about them. The frame was flawless, built carefully, piece by piece, with just enough truth laced into the lies to make it believable, just enough emotion to make it sympathetic, and just enough detail to make it impossible to disprove without sounding defensive. Every word was calculated, every tear rehearsed, every story crafted to trigger sympathy and protection. They made themselves the victim and cast you as the villain with surgical precision. And everyone believed it because people crave simple stories. They want clear heroes and obvious monsters. They want to think they can recognize evil when they see it. But evil doesn't come with warning signs. It hides behind the face of the hurt, the wounded, the misunderstood. And it points at the real victim, screaming, "Monster," until everyone sees fangs where there's only exhaustion and survival. You tried to defend yourself, but every defense sounded like an excuse, every explanation like a justification, every attempt to tell your side made you look more guilty. Because that's how framing works. That's how gaslighting functions on a mass scale. They set the narrative, and anything you said to contradict it only reinforced their illusion. Eventually, you stopped trying. You stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped bleeding for people who wanted your silence more than your truth. You went quiet, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. You stopped playing their game. You stopped feeding them ammunition. And that silence, that terrified them, because silence meant they no longer had control. Silence meant you were healing. Where they couldn't monitor or control it, your silence became powerful. The truth didn't surface because you convinced anyone or finally found the right words. It came out because lies have expiration dates. Manipulation always leaves evidence. And people who frame others can't help but repeat their own patterns until someone finally notices. And once one person does, once a single crack appears in the facade, the whole structure collapses. Suddenly, everyone sees what was always there. The truth didn't change. It was the truth all along. The only difference is that now people are finally willing to look at it, finally brave enough to admit they were wrong, finally disgusted enough with themselves to feel something resembling remorse. And you get to watch it happen. You get to see the narrative flip in real time. The same people who abandoned you now scrambling to distance themselves from the one who framed you. But let's be honest. As satisfying as this vindication might feel, it doesn't undo what you went through. It doesn't give back the time you lost, heal the damage to your mental health, or restore your faith in people. You spent months, maybe years, being treated like you were toxic, dangerous, someone to be avoided and whispered about. You replayed conversations over and over, questioned your own memory, wondered if maybe they were right and you really were the problem. You withdrew, not because you stopped caring, but because solitude felt safer than being misunderstood. You stopped sharing your story because every time you did, the looks you got told you they'd already made up their minds. That kind of isolation is a psychological torture most will never understand. The slow, silent war of being framed by someone everyone adores while you're the one everyone suspects. And now everyone's disgusted, everyone's sorry, everyone suddenly remembers how they always had a bad feeling about the other person. They want to apologize, to say they should have believed you, should have listened. But where were they when you needed them? Where were they when you were screaming into the void, desperate for just one person to give you the benefit of the doubt? They were silent. They were comfortable. They were protecting their peace while you drowned in chaos. And now they want credit for feeling guilty. They want you to comfort them, forgive them. Let them become part of your healing arc, as if they weren't complicit in your destruction. But you don't owe them that comfort. You don't owe them forgiveness just because the truth finally forced its way through their denial. What they don't understand, and maybe never will, is that you didn't survive this to make them feel better about their betrayal. You didn't claw your way out of that pit just to hand them redemption. You did it for you. You healed for you. You rebuilt your identity for you. Their regret and their guilt don't change the fact that you did it alone. You were your own witness when no one else would see, your own defender when everyone else accused, your own proof that you weren't what they said you were. and that makes you something they can't comprehend, something that still unsettles them, even now that they know the truth. Because the real shock isn't just that you were innocent, it's that you stayed good, you stayed honest, you stayed true to yourself, even when being fake would have been easier, even when playing their game might have protected your reputation. You refused to become what they accused you of being. You refused to let their lies reshape your character or their betrayal turn you into a betrayer. That kind of integrity, the courage to stand firm in your truth even when it cost you everything, is what they can't comprehend. Because most of them would have folded, most would have compromised, most would have become the monster just to survive the accusation. Right now, inside the minds of those who finally realize they destroyed you for nothing, guilt isn't the only thing festering, it's fear. They're terrified of what you might do with your vindication, of what you might say about them, of how easily you could expose their part in your suffering. They're scrambling to regain control of the narrative, spinning it to make themselves look like victims too. They want to be seen as people who were deceived, not as people who consciously chose disbelief. They're begging for sympathy for being fooled, for understanding for their mistake. They want to be seen as collateral damage of the same deception that nearly broke you. But you see through that now. You recognize the pattern, the desperate rewriting of history, the calculated manipulation dressed up as remorse. Some people are so obsessed with protecting their own innocence that they'll twist reality itself to avoid accountability. They'll claim they didn't know, that the liar was too convincing, that they would have acted differently if only they'd had the full picture. But the truth is, they did have your picture. They had your testimony, your consistency, your character. They just chose to ignore it because it was easier to believe someone else. Their disgust, their horror, their regret. It's all self-centered. It's about them learning to live with what they did, not about them truly understanding what they put you through. And here's the part that cuts the deepest. Some of them still don't fully believe you, even now, even with the evidence laid bare. They're minimizing it, softening it, convincing themselves it wasn't that bad or that maybe both sides were to blame. Because to fully accept the truth would mean facing the full weight of their guilt. And most people would rather live in denial than do that. They'd rather blur the lines, pretend no one was really at fault, than confront the ugly reality that they helped destroy someone who never deserved it. They'll crawl back now with half-hearted apologies, trying to sound sincere while carefully avoiding accountability. Their messages will be filled with excuses dressed up as explanations, phrases like, "I didn't know the whole story," or "I was manipulated too," or the classic, "I just didn't want to get involved." They'll pretend these words carry the weight of remorse when in reality they're just desperate attempts to rewrite their own part in what happened. They'll offer you peace without restitution, closure without honesty, forgiveness without reflection. They'll try to smooth things over with half-truths and vague sentiments because facing the full extent of their betrayal would shatter the image they have of themselves. But here's the thing. You don't need their peace. You don't need their closure. You don't need them to finally understand what they did because you've already stopped needing anything from them at all. You've already done what they never could. You survived annihilation, not physical, but emotional, social, spiritual. You survived being erased, misrepresented, and demonized while the real perpetrator was praised for their bravery and charm. You lived through being abandoned by people who swore they cared about you, only to watch them align with your accuser and call it neutrality. You were buried under lies, but instead of suffocating, you learned to breathe through the soil. You clawed your way out piece by piece until you could stand again, not as the person you were before, but as someone sharper, wiser, untouchable. They called you broken. But what they didn't realize is that every break made you more unbreakable. You rebuilt yourself from the debris they left behind. You found strength in solitude, courage in silence, and clarity in pain. You learned that your own validation is stronger than 1,000 apologies. You learned that survival, when the world turns its back, is a form of power that terrifies those who depend on approval to exist. You trusted yourself when no one else would, You became your own truth, your own protector, your own anchor, and that's something no one can ever strip away. So let them sit in their shame. Let them replay every moment they dismissed you, every time they stayed silent, every time they laughed at your pain because it was easier than confronting their cowardice. Let them choke on their guilt when they realize how easily they were manipulated into becoming your executioners. You don't owe them a comforting version of your story. You don't owe them forgiveness just because the truth is now undeniable. You've earned your rage, your boundaries, your refusal to make it easy for them. Healing doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means integrating it, learning from it, and knowing that some wounds don't need to be forgiven to be closed. Now, let's talk about the person who orchestrated it all, the one who built the narrative that almost destroyed you, the architect of deception, the liar who looked you dead in the eye, smiled, and spoke poison so convincingly that even you began to question your own sanity. That person is panicking now. The walls are closing in. They're scrambling behind the scenes, reaching out to anyone who will still listen, spinning new versions of events like a drowning person clawing at the air. They're messaging mutual friends, twisting timelines, inventing motives, trying to reframe themselves as the misunderstood hero of their own downfall. They'll say you are obsessed. They'll say you can't let go. They'll accuse you of trying to ruin them when all you ever did was tell the truth they worked so hard to bury. They're not sorry. They're terrified. Terrified of exposure, of losing control, of having their carefully crafted mask ripped away. Terrified that the sympathy they weaponized for so long is evaporating now that the truth has teeth. Their panic isn't guilt, it's fear of consequence. They don't feel remorse. They feel cornered. And still, unbelievably, some people will defend them. Some people are so emotionally invested in the lie that they can't afford to believe the truth. They'll twist themselves into pretzels trying to justify it, saying the evidence is misinterpreted or that you're exaggerating or that it's more complicated than it looks. They'll argue for gray areas that don't exist, because admitting the truth means admitting they helped destroy someone innocent. It means facing the fact that they weren't bystanders. They were participants. That's a truth most people simply aren't built to handle. So they choose denial. They cling to the illusion because it's safer than the mirror. They'd rather live in the comfort of confusion than face the discomfort of conscience. They'll keep saying, it wasn't that bad, everyone makes mistakes, you need to move on, because that's their way of shrinking the story to fit their guilt. But you know the truth. You lived it. You paid for it. You carry the scars that they only watched from a distance. And while they're busy managing their image, you've already transcended the entire game. You no longer need to convince anyone of who you are, because your integrity speaks louder than every lie that tried to bury you. You've already won. Not because they apologized, not because the world finally caught up, but because you endured, you evolved, and you stayed you. They'll cling to anything, any excuse, any half-truth, any desperate rationalization, just to avoid confronting the one fact that would crush their self-image, that they were manipulated into becoming weapons against someone who never deserved it. They'll say they didn't know, that they got caught up in things, that they meant well but were misled. They'll dissect the situation to death, trying to find loopholes that make their betrayal seem smaller, softer, more understandable. Because if they admit the full truth, if they face what they actually did, they'd have to look straight into the mirror and see not victims of manipulation, but accomplices to it. And most people don't have the courage for that. Most would rather twist reality than face the shame of what they became. But truth, real truth, not the kind people spin to protect themselves, has no interest in being convenient. It doesn't need defending or rebranding. It doesn't need you to stand on a soapbox or prove it with passion. It simply is. Solid, unbothered, undeniable. It doesn't panic, doesn't chase, doesn't beg to be seen. Truth just waits, steady as stone, while lies collapse under their own weight. And that's what's happening now. Slowly, relentlessly, The performance falls apart. The inconsistencies surface. The false stories contradict themselves. And the truth, quiet and patient, reclaims its place. That's the beautiful thing about truth. It outlasts everything built on illusion. You don't have to fight for it anymore. You don't have to exhaust yourself trying to convince people who never wanted to see you clearly in the first place. Those still clinging to the lie, protecting the narrative that justified their behavior, they're no longer your problem. They've shown you who they are, and it's not your job to save them from their own cowardice. Let them keep their illusions if that's what they need to sleep at night. Let them drown in their denial while you breathe freely in clarity. Because now you get to decide who belongs in your story, and anyone who preferred a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth doesn't deserve a single page in your next chapter. Here's what most people will never grasp. The most devastating part of the manipulation wasn't the rumors or the reputational damage. It was what it did to you inside your own mind. That was the real frame, the masterpiece of deceit. The end.